entire program in the stipulated time. So again, I request everyone to be very cautious about the time. So first, I would like to invite the chairman of Popular Front of India, a leader of our movement, 𝐏𝐚𝐴 Salam Sahab, to present his inaugural speech. 𝐏𝐚𝐴 Salam Sahab.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters and our respected guest speakers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah. Today I am very happy in two respects. Because today, as we the people of India has got a chance through this conference to once again declare we are with Palestine. Secondly, now we got a very good opportunity to listen to the real Palestinians, those who are from Gaza or those who are very closely related to Palestine and Al-Quds. Alhamdulillah, I think this is a very rare opportunity we are getting. In that two respects, I am saying, Alhamdulillah, I am very happy today. Why? People of India are very much interested in all happenings, all developments in Al-Quds, Baitul Muqaddas. Because, of course, we know, as Muslims, it is part of our Iman. We give importance to Masjid Al-Aqsa, similar to the holy masjid in Makkah and Medina. Though for us Muslims, it is important for us. At the same time, as an Indian citizen, we are very much in touch with or deeply related with Palestine. Because even before the illegal inception of the rock state Israel in 1930s, there was discussions in the air about forming a Jewish country, Jewish state. At that time, the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, declared Palestine belongs to the Arabs. The same sense that Britain belongs to British and France belongs to French. That stand was very clear. From that time onwards, the people of India stands with the Palestinian people and for their rights. And during the formation of that Israel as a conspiracy of the bigger nations, at that time also India opposed the move of United Nations to divide Palestine and to form a Jewish state. The stand was clear. And at that time, there was a very, very huge pressure on the then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, to take a stand in favor of Israel. There were very worldly leaders and some individuals, influential individuals like Albert Einstein, directly called Nehru, directly wrote letters to the Prime Minister. But Prime Minister took a very strong stand against Israel and in favor of Palestine. That was historically our stand. Therefore, the people of India sure interested in the freedom of Palestinians and we are interested in the development of Palestine. Unfortunately, after many decades, India started diplomatic tie-up with Israel, and some developments are. Actually, it was against the wish and will of the common people of India. Still, people of India continue their interest in Palestine and Al-Quds. That's what I am saying. As a Muslim, it's important for us. As an India, historically, we were always with Palestine, and now we are with Palestine. And Moreover, as a people's movement, as a part of a people's movement, Popular Front of India believes that anywhere, wherever it is, any country, any situation, a people's movement should be with the people, not with the dictators, not with the military, not with the injustice. People's movement always work for justice and peace. It should always work for equality. It should strive for human rights. Then, in that sense, we can consider Palestine. Now, what is happening there? What's happening there? This there happen attack on common people. Those people come into the Mosque Al-Aqsa for prayers, even during Ramadan. The armed military attacks them. Armed military attacks unarmed common civilians. Similarly, they are trying to evict the local people, the Palestinians, from their birthland. And also, at the same time, this Israel, they are actually pouring bombs about the civilians. It's a war crime. In all respect, we can say a people movement should be the people of Palestine, because this is struggle for justice, struggle for basic human rights, the right of a human being to see life. That is the matter. Therefore, we are very interested in the matter of the Palestine, and that's why now, Alhamdulillah, we could conduct a conference like this. Alhamdulillah, now we are very happy that we are having guests from Gaza and Palestine and from Istanbul, etc. Now, Popular Front of India is very active in the social circle of India from since last 2 decades. We struggle for equality, freedom, justice, and security to all people. Perhaps from media, you may know that Popular Front of India volunteers are very active now in the fighting against COVID. Now our volunteers are active in the field as COVID warriors, and people in tens of thousands of number, they are getting the benefit of our volunteer service. Alhamdulillah. May Allah accept the sacrifice of our brothers during this pandemic period. But at the same time, actually, Popular Front of India give priority to the unity of people. They are trying to organize the common people. We are making them aware of their rights and duties. And practically, we are taking steps for their total empowerment. The empowerment of the downtrodden, the marginalized, the suppressed, the oppressed people, and make them in pace with the other developed communities. And that is why we are focusing achievement of equality, freedom, and justice to the public. At the same time, rather than the academic, research, or educational and empowerment activities, we are very active in agitation, democratic agitation. We believe it is the way to get our rights, and it is the way to face the confront the problems in a democratic country. Wherever there is a violation in human rights, wherever we feel the democracy or the freedom is weakened or attacked, and wherever there is a discrimination on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste or anything else, language or region, we intervene. We come with agitation, democratic agitation. And actually, most important thing, Popular Front of India thinks that India faces a very, very serious threat from the side of Hindutva fascism. Just like Zionism threatens the very existence of Palestinian people. Not only Palestinian people, it is actually a threat to the world. Then actually the rock state Israel, it exposed terrorism to the whole world. Similarly, now in India, the hindrance of fascism, that fascism is a very, it is a threat to even the existence of the democratic India. Because we were very proud of our heritage, unity in diversity, our democracy, our, even though we are the second most populated country in the world, we were in the way to achieve the state of a welfare state, but now the whole picture has changed. Now, due to the ulterior agenda, hidden agenda of this fascist, the secular country is becoming a religious one, means a biased one. Then there is no equality between the people, but some are more equal. Similarly, most dangerous threat to the India. Therefore, our priority is to expose the real threats of fascism, to make people aware of that, and use all means of democratic ways and all possible ways to defeat fascism. That is our prime agenda. And therefore, as a people's movement, actively working the grassroots of India, of course, we are very much interested in the happening, the development everywhere in the world, and that is why now I am saying on behalf of People Fund of India and on behalf of the people of India, I am saying, I declare, we support Palestinians. We appreciate the sacrifice and determination of Palestinians. And also, actually, we are getting motivated by the Palestinians. We support because this is the struggle for basic human rights. We support Palestinians for getting their birthland from. We support Palestinians to get the Qudus back to the hands of the believers. But our support has limitations. In what way we can support Palestine? First of all, let me say, you are in our prayers. Palestine, Al-Qudus are in fire. Of course, if Allah decides, it is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In yansurkumullahu fala ghaliba lahu. If Allah desires to help you, support you, then nobody can win over you. Then you will surely win. Inshallah, Palestine. It is a struggle for truth, human rights. Therefore, Palestine will win, succeed, no doubt. Therefore, you will be in our prayers. And along with that, we will be vocal for the cause of Palestine, for the cause of Al-Qudus, everywhere, whatever platform we are getting. And inshallah, we will maintain this memory of Qudus, this thought for Qudus as a live memory among all the people, and we will not allow to get it forgotten. And inshallah, we shall pressure the government of India to take a stand in international bodies in favor of Palestine. That's our part. Therefore, it is our role to support the Palestinian cause. Similarly, I already told you we are appreciating the unity and steadfastness of Palestinians. Sure, during last few days, we witnessed really pain for the people of Palestine, especially Gaza. Many became martyrs, shaheed. Out of them, there are ladies and children. But still, I can see, Alhamdulillah, they are united. are not divided, and also, and now still they are in the struggle for getting their homeland, for getting back their Al-Qudus. That determination is to be appreciated. On behalf of Popular Front of India, I earnestly appreciate that determination and unity and steadfastness for Palestine. And I mentioned that we people also get motivation from the people of Palestine. We see the people of Gaza, a small land, an open jail, full of civilian, unarmed people. But the other side, one Israel, but most cruel and armed country in the world, having no ethics, no principles, they poured bombs on this common people. But in this confrontation, if Israel failed, I believe Israel failed, utterly defeated. And that is the success of the common people, unarmed people, the success of the people over military power. And secondly, people, I noticed that near about 100,000 people gathered in Mosque Al-Aqsa on the 27th night of the Holy Ramadan. Then that gathering was after brutal attack the Israel forces on the believers who came in the masjid. That means even after attack, alhamdulillah, the believers are determined enough to come to the prayer and gather there, assemble there. And this kind of the activity and sacrifice and determination, actually, it is motivating the whole people all over the world. That's why I'm saying now we support and we appreciate, and also we are getting motivated from the people of Palestine. And finally, let me once again express my solidarity to the people of Palestine. The people of Palestine, they may have no land, no peaceful life, they may have no wealth, but I understand that they have enough hope, they have enough determination, they have clear vision, and above all, they are having, alhamdulillah, strong iman, which is above all. Therefore, on behalf of Popular Front of India, once again, I express my solidarity to the people of Palestine and our support of the cause of Al-Qudus. And with this word, let me formally inaugurate this online conference with the holy words of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. I'm happy to inaugurate this online conference, and Jazakallah, all guests and all those listening me are once again congratulated and welcome to the very valuable speeches of our distinguished guests. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you and Jazakallah to the Chairman of Popular Front of India, Janab 𝐏𝐚𝐿 Sahab, for presenting the inaugural speech and also inaugurating our webinar. I thank you again on behalf of all our members and all our organizers. Now I would like to invite our second guest and one of the main speakers for today's webinar. He is Professor Dr. Sami A. Al-Aryan, who is the Director of Center for Islam and Global Affairs, and also he is a Public Affairs Professor in the 𝐷𝐨𝐚𝐝 University, Istanbul, and he'll be talking on the topic how the Palestinians face the current crisis. So I would like to invite Dr. Sami Al-Aryan to come forward and present his views.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for the invitation. I want to thank the organizers and the audience for being here today, speaking about this important topic. If the events that started on May 10th and for the next couple of weeks or so demonstrated anything, it has demonstrated the fact that today Palestine represents the struggle for justice around the world. It has become the symbol of all oppressed people around the world, those who have been aggressed upon, those who are struggling to regain and restore their rights. Israel today, it's always been, but today more than ever, a lot of people have discovered the nature of the Zionist state. When we talk about the struggle in Palestine, we really have to go back to the origin of the struggle. Otherwise, we will be lost in details. This struggle did not start a couple of weeks ago. It started over a century ago. And the reason we have a war today, the reason that we have this tension, the reason we have a conflict, the reason we have people being killed by the dozens and the hundreds and the thousands for the past 70 years is because of this origin. That is the Zionist state, the Zionist movement that started way back towards the end of the 19th century. When we look at the history of Jews, both in the Muslim world as well as in the Christian world, we'll find that there is a vast difference. Jewish encyclopedia called their presence within the Islamic communities throughout its history of 1300 years, the golden age of Jews, particularly in Andalusia. When we look, on the other hand, at the presence of the Jewish communities in Christendom, in the Christian world, we find that they were under tremendous pressure and persecution to the point that they had to suffer all the way, a lot of indignancies, all the way up until the pogroms and later on, of course, the Holocaust. The lesson that the Jewish presence in Europe taught them is that they need, in the re-emergence of the nation-state system, back after Westphalia and its development, and right after the century of nationalism in the 19th century, is that they need to establish a national home. They need to establish a homeland. And they put their sights on Palestine, which was not empty. Palestine had its own inhabitants, it had its own history, rich history, its own heritage, and it was part and parcel of the Muslim world. It included Jerusalem, which is the third holiest place for Muslims around the world, where the Prophet has gone there in the night journey, where the prayers itself was prescribed during that night, where he led the Prophet. So it has a very, very sacred presence, not to mention, of course, that long history. My lineage, for instance, my grandfather was born in Jerusalem in 1892, but they take, of course, their heritage back centuries. On my mother's side, it goes even 1300 years, in the 7th century, when the first presence of the Arabs who followed the Prophet Muhammad went and conquest Jerusalem, and where Jerusalem became, of course, Islamic continuously, except for the few years that the Crusaders were in control, and it was another onslaught on Jerusalem, and it was liberated later on. Now, this Zionist movement came in the same way as other settler colonialist movements have become. It is not an indigenous movement for liberation. It brought its own purpose is to expel the indigenous people and replace them with a racial group, and that is because they redefined Judaism as an ethnicity, to replace them with Jews from around the world. That is the main purpose through settler colonialist project. Put it simply, that's what Israel is. It's a project. It's a settler colonialist project that has been led by the Zionist movement now for over a century. And its main purpose, as I said, is to bring Jews from around the world and to replace Palestinians, depopulate Palestine, expel the Palestinians, and bring Jews in their place. That happened, obviously, on a large, massive scale during the 1948 Nakba catastrophe, where over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homelands. My own family on both sides, from my parents, from my father's side, as well as from my mother's side, both were expelled from the city of Jaffa back in 1948, never allowed to go back again and restore their rights, their residences, their businesses, and so on and so forth. Another goal of the Zionists is not just to depopulate the areas that they take over, but also to expand their presence in Palestine. That is, they want to take over the whole land and expel as many of the Palestinians from these homelands so that they can be replaced by Jews. And that is the source of what happened back in Ramadan. There is a neighborhood, of course, if we go trace back also the history, they took about 78% of Palestine in 1948. It became 100% after the 1967 war, where the Palestinians were totally dominated by the presence of Israel through its military structure, through its intelligence services, through its police state, through a military regime. Palestinians have been living now, and I'm talking about the Palestinians in the 1967 areas, have been living under a military regime, under occupation. And people have to understand what that means. Military occupation. You are dominated in every aspect, every phase of your life. You have really no political rights. You have very little legal rights. Your economy is being controlled. Your life is being controlled. Your social structure is being controlled. Your residence is being controlled. Your water, your electricity, your education, every aspect of your life is being controlled by this regime, which is a military regime dominated by Israel, by its policies, as well as by its military. Another aspect of the Zionist movement is that not only they want to dominate, but they want to take as much of the land as possible. And of course, that's been done very, very slowly, gradually over the years. So today, before the 1993 Oslo they limit what the Palestinians can build on their own homeland. They try to make life miserable for them so that they can leave. And then they bring illegal settlers. These are not settlers, these are colonialists who are trying to take over Palestinians' lands and property. And in the neighborhood, one of the neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, which is close to the Haram, close to the Masjid Al-Aqsa, is a neighborhood called Sheikh Jarrah. And what they want to do and what they have been trying to do, and they have done it in the past, they're trying to do it now, is to expel dozens of families, which count almost hundreds of people, by making fake illegal arguments. And of course, it goes to a racist judiciary that it's already been determined that eventually what they will do is to expel the Palestinians. They try every trick in the book to get it by trying to bribe the Palestinians, threaten the Palestinians, pressure the Palestinians. And when they don't give up, they just go and take it over and they throw them in the streets. And that's exactly what's happening. And in conjunction with this, there was another day they called Jerusalem Day. That's the day they entered Jerusalem back in 1967, where they have a parade every year by celebrating the fact that they have occupied Arab Jerusalem. And that this year, however, there were some extremist settlers that they wanted to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holiest month, after the holiest night of the month, which is after Laylatul Qadr, and take over the Haram by the thousands. And of course, the Palestinians were determined not to let that happen, and they started demonstrating, they started objecting to this. And in an effort for the Israelis to say that we are the dominant, we are the sovereign, we are the people in control, they kept pressuring the Palestinians, attacking the Palestinians, the worshippers, during the nights of Ramadan. And it is reported that hundreds, perhaps as many as 600 or 700 people were injured during these raids. Now, the resistance in Gaza, those people who have been preparing to stand up to Jewish presence, illegal Jewish presence in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, as well as to the illegal apartheid system of Israel, is that they said, if you're going to do this, we are going to respond. We're not going just to simply accept your assertions that you're going to do this and take over our holy mosque, our sacred properties, and intimidate the Palestinians and kick them out and expel them. We're not going to take this. They give them one warning after the other. And of course, when they did not take it seriously, these things erupted. And for the first time, Israelis were under bombardment to the point where almost social and economic life was standstill. It just stopped. Airports were stopped. The economic production was stopped because they couldn't, this dome that they, the Iron Dome, they assert that it's going to stop all these rockets. Actually, they didn't stop much of them. And now they have to face more sophisticated rockets that basically after 10 days, they had to back off. That is the assertion. But before we go through this, in the few minutes I have left, I really want to discuss the long-term nature of what we are looking at, because there has been a lot of movement, political movement, that this is that there is a lack of political progress, that what we need here is a two-state solution. There is no two-state solution. Let's not kid ourselves thinking that there is somehow a magic political solution that is around the corner if the Palestinians were just compromising, if the Palestinians were just reasonable. The fact of the matter is that Palestinians have been given all the compromises, including the greatest compromise that came in '93, where the PLO leadership recognized Israel on 78% of Palestinian land. And then they were promised that within 5 years, they can be in control of the rest, the 22% in Gaza and the West Bank, and that they will have their own state. And yet today we are almost 27, 28 years later with nothing in hand to show. In fact, all the possibilities of having a two-state solution is gone because of the presence of settlers and because of the determination of Israel in its Zionist form, that they have to take over the whole land and to depopulate Palestine as many of the people as possible. And if they do not adhere to Zionist dictates, then they must leave. That's the simple fact. And I think the world now is opening up, is waking up to the fact that this is what they're dealing with. They're dealing with a very aggressive colonialist settler project that is intent on imposing its own will on the rest by force. And the Palestinians, because they said no, and they're willing to resist and to stand up to aggression and oppression and repression and all kinds of pressures, then we are at a moment of clarity in this whole world, that if the world does not stand up with those who defend their rights on the side of justice against the side of evil, then obviously they have chosen sides and they must be held accountable. Now, if you look at the real solution, the road to peace and justice, it is we cannot compromise with racial hierarchy in the same way that the world refused to compromise with apartheid South Africa. The world must today refuse and reject any kind of compromise with a system that prefers a certain racial group or ethnic group over the other. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing Jewish supremacy taking place in the land of Palestine, where you have today, if you are Jew, you haven't not ever set foot in the land of Palestine, you can just go there and get citizenship and get help from the government and get all the support you want. If you are a Palestinian whose ancestry goes back to generations and hundreds or thousands of years, you are denied all rights. That is wrong and must stop and must be rejected. And that's exactly what the world now that we're seeing before our own eyes. There are millions of people today who are waking up to the fact that this is what they're dealing with. They're dealing with an apartheid colonialist settler project, and they reject it. And therefore the Palestinians, because they are fighting back, they are trying to get back their rights, to restore back justice, the right of return, the right to bring their properties and their presence and not to be an afterthought, not to be a memory, not to be a heritage, not to be a period of history that has gone. They insist to go back. And that's what we're witnessing today. Now, the Zionist state, of course, is going to fight back. I mean, and to do that, they have certain tactics, and that's what they use. Obviously, it's what we see today in Israel is a garrison state. It's a military state that has been armed to the teeth, particularly by the United States. And of course, they always align themselves with other imperialist systems, imperial states, colonial states, whether it was Britain at one point or France in the 1950s, or whether it's the United States after 73, or after Nixon, who have similar ideologies like the Hindutva, that what we see in India. Now the ruling party in India has been allying itself with the Zionist states because they have the same mentality in order to depopulate or at least bring other people, let's say in the state of Kashmir. They're using Israeli tactics so that they can control the special status of Kashmir that has been a disputed. And of course, Kashmir has been under occupation now for decades. In order to, they can bring Kashmir to the fold of that country, regardless of what the indigenous population wish for. We can also see in this that not only they want to have hegemony over the entire region, but to weaken it, fragment it further. And we've seen many witnesses to this. We have seen it in the case of Sudan, how they've been a player into this. We have seen it in their attempt to break up, several areas, several regions, whether from the Kurdish part of Iraq or others. So it is very clear what their goal is. Let me conclude, because of the time, is that the goal of confronting an ideology that trying to maintain a racial hierarchy of one group over the other is to dismantle that state. We had that experience with apartheid South Africa. We could not have compromised with an apartheid regime. You cannot compromise with people who look down on others. What you need to do is to dismantle the institutions that bring this ideology into existence. After you dismantle this, then you talk about restoring justice to the victims of these institutions. And then we talk about peace. That's the only way we can bring peace. You bring peace by dealing with the roots of the problem. And the roots of the problem is that there is a movement that is trying to impose itself by force, by favoring a certain racial ethnic group over the other, by denying the rights of the other groups, the other ethnicities, and by imposing a whole regime on the whole region that will basically say, we are the dominant, we are we are in control, we are the hegemon, and if you don't like it, you're going to have to either accept it, or you're going to be basically aggressed upon. And if people say no and they resist, and that's what we are seeing, then they will certainly at one point defeat this regime in the same way that the people allied themselves around the world by building a worldwide movement in the 70s and 80s that brought down apartheid South Africa. What we need today is a worldwide movement, because the Palestinians themselves cannot deal with this menace, with this evil power, because of its support beyond simply the Middle East, because of its lifeline that's coming from many corners of the world. So what we need to do to have is a worldwide movement that will deal with this apartheid state in Palestine, that will bring it, that will weaken it, and eventually will bring it down and dismantle it. I'm not talking about, of course, all the rhetoric that they say, killing the Jews. In fact, Jews found security in the Muslim world. When they were kicked out, and when they were facing either they have to become Christians or to have to die, they elected to go and emigrate into Muslim lands, all the way from Morocco to Indonesia, including, of course, here in Istanbul. And they call their presence within the Islamic world as being their golden age, because Muslims simply recognize Judaism as a heavenly, as a great religion, and therefore we have no problems with Jews. We have problem with Zionism. You can be a Zionist Jew, you can be a Zionist Christian, you can be a Zionist Muslim, you can be a Zionist Hindu, you can be a Zionist Buddhist, or you can be a Zionist with no religion at all. All of these would be enemies. But you can be also a person who is against Zionism of any faith, and you would be welcome into that struggle. And today what we need to do is a worldwide movement that will stand up to the apartheid regime in Palestine, and that will bring it down. And to do that, we have to confront them at all levels, in all geographies, and across all disciplines, diplomatically, politically, socially, economically, academically, culturally, human rights, media, you name it. Every aspect of that struggle we must engage in, because this is how we're going to bring it down, and this is how we're going to have this is how we're going to triumph, and this is how we're going to bring victory not only to the victims of Zionism inside Palestine and those who are in the diaspora, but for the whole world. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Sami, for presenting a very motivating presentation before us. And I would like to thank you on behalf of our organization for your special talk. Now I'll be moving to our next lecture. Our next topic is the impact of Arab-Israel normalization on the Palestinian cause. And to speak on that topic, we have Dr. Moshe Amir, who is Assistant Professor of Linguistics from the Islamic University of Gaza, and also he's the Director of the Center of Political and Development Studies. So I invite Dr. Moshe Amir to present his thoughts.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you very much for having me and for organizing this event. I would like to extend my greetings and appreciation to the Popular Front of India for organizing this important seminar, and also for the support of the Palestinian people's struggle for freedom and self-determination. The issue of normalization indeed is a very dangerous issue for the Palestinian people, with very serious and destructive ramifications for the whole Palestinian struggle and for the legitimacy of the Palestinian struggle, as I will try to delineate in a few minutes, inshallah. So if we begin by defining normalization, it is any participation in any activity, any event, any initiative or program that brings together Arabs, Palestinians, Muslims, or any individual or a group around the world on one side, and the Israeli Zionists on the other side. And this normalization activity is either individual or institutional, without taking at sort of its central plan, resisting Israel's colonialism, resisting Israel's ethnic cleansing and occupation. And therefore, when we think of normalization, we think that normalization treats Israel as a normal state, when in reality, when the facts on the grounds are quite to the contrary. Israel is not a normal state. Israel is not like Sweden or Norway or Finland or any other country or Switzerland. Israel is a Hitler colonial project that was built on the ruins, that was built on the ashes of the Palestinians, on the Palestinian society and on the Palestinian people and land. It was built after the systematic depopulation of the Palestinian people and Palestinian lands, after this systematic ethnic cleansing that has been going on for almost a century. It is built on the disposition of the Palestinian people and is built on a matrix of oppressive measures, on a matrix of racist laws, the aim of which is to see sort of the Palestinian people vanish and not be present in their historical land. So basically, when we think of normalization, we are treating Israel as something that is normal, when it is not really the case. So by Israel trying to engage in all these sort of normalization projects with Arab states, now we've got like 4 Arab countries recently in the recent year or so. Israel tries to create a shift in perception, a shift in the collective and the individual consciousness of Arabs, of Muslims, of Palestinians, and of all people around the world that sees Israel as a normal state, as a civilized country, as a democracy in this world. But Israel is not really the case. It's not really so. Israel is, or it continues to engage in ethnic cleansing and brutal occupation. The most recent manifestation of this brutality is in the aggression on Gaza that ended just last week. 11 days of vicious, brutal, unabated attack against Palestinians, against Palestinian civilians, Palestinian civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, as well as the ethnic cleansing in Al-Quds and the Judaization of Al-Quds, of Jerusalem, of Al-Quds and Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. And again, with this unabated, frenetic settler colonial activities in the West Bank, and with the imprisonment and the repeated aggressions all over Palestine, not simply in the lands occupied in 1967, but as we have seen in the lands occupied in 1948. So we as Palestinians, we as Arabs, we as Muslims, as free people, free conscientious people around the world, are in total rejection of Israel. We want to delegitimize Israel, not to grant it legitimacy, and not to treat it as something that is normal, that is acceptable, that is part of this plan, the larger Middle East, the bigger, the larger or the greater Middle East. But we have to always make sure that Israel is treated as a brutal military occupation, as a colonization, as a settler colonial project. And therefore, we totally reject all these attempts to normalize and to treat Israel as a normal state. Again, the idea of normalization and the efforts by the Israelis to normalize Israel is mainly, I think, it's at the consciousness level, which basically tries to, through which Israel tries to whitewash its crimes, to give the facade of a democracy, of a normal state that is basically living side by side with some Arab states, with some Palestinians. But that is to say, Israel seeks to find legitimacy in the eyes of the Arabs, in the eyes of the Palestinians, in the eyes of the Muslims all over the world. And again, Israel wants to see all the realities of the occupation, all the realities of ethnic cleansing, all the draconian measures exercised by Israel against the Palestinians, wherever they are, as something that can be acceptable, as something that can be accommodated, as something that can be legitimated, because we're treating, or those Arabs are treating Israel as something that is quite normal and unacceptable. But again, we as Muslims, we have to reject to the idea of giving legitimacy to Israel. As we have noticed and observed over the past year, I mean, there have been, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been bragging about his sort of normalization agreements, the Abraham sort of accord with Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and with Sudan. And this is really unfortunate to see that Arab countries who have been long sort of supportive of the Palestinian rights, been supportive of the Palestinian aspirations for freedom and self-determination, we've seen them that they're bowing down to Israel's and trying to sort of gloss over, to bypass the Palestinians, to sort of gloss over and actually scorn the Palestinian legitimate rights and the Palestinian legitimate demands and struggle for freedom. And they just want to forge relations with the Israeli occupation state. So we think that this is really a stab in the back of the Palestinians, a stab at the very heart of the Palestinian struggle, national struggle, moral struggle for freedom and self-determination, and for an end to the Israeli occupation. So basically, normalization also encourages Israel to continue what it has been doing against the Palestinian people over the past decades. Basically, it means that, yes, Israel can go on with its total denial of the Palestinian existence, of denial of the Palestinian rights and aspirations, and basically it can do business as usual, as they can say. So basically, this is really an attempt to whitewash Israel and to give it legitimacy at our expense as Palestinians, at our expense as Muslims aspiring and struggling to free Palestine from all of this colonialism and an attempt to sort of end Palestine's colonization by the Israelis. So again, it is unacceptable for us, the Palestinians, and every conscientious person around the world to accept this kind of normalization. Basically, what we really want as Palestinians, not really normalization, but actually BDS, a boycott. This is the least that we can do around the world. This is the least that Arabs and Muslims and every conscientious-based person around the world is to boycott Israel, to delegitimize Israel, to accept, to impose sanctions on Israel, to divest from Israel, to disengage from any attempt to normalize at the sporting level, at the cultural level, at the academic level, at the economic level, at the political and diplomatic level, because these sort of boycott, this kind of boycott and divestment, BDS, is really, this sends the right message to the Israelis, but not only the Israelis, but also to those who normalize with the Israel, that this is not the proper course of action. We want to punish Israel for its crimes against the Palestinians. We want to punish Israel and those normalizers when they for what they've been doing to the Palestinian people. And the proper course also is that we cannot accept the legitimacy of Israel unless it complies with international law, unless it complies with the United Nations resolutions that basically and fundamentally called for the end of the occupation and granting the Palestinians their right of return, granting the Palestinians their right to self-determination and an end to the Israeli occupation. So boycotting is breaking off, not building relations with colonial Israel. It's a breaking of the cultural, political, economic, and military ties with the Israeli occupation. And it is an institutional, an official, or a formal choice, but boycott is also an individual choice that every individual in this world, and particularly in this respect, Muslims in India and everywhere, this is an individual choice by choosing to boycott Israel's products, by choosing to boycott any kind of engagement at sporting, at cultural, at academic, at economic level with Israel, because we cannot equate between the victim, the Palestinian victim, and the Israeli Zionist colonizer and the Israeli Zionist oppressor. This is what we really want our Arab brothers to do, and certainly what our Muslim brothers and sisters want to do is to engage in boycott, engage in divestment and sanctions against the Israeli occupation state, and certainly against those who normalize with Israel, because we want to punish them and to send them the right message that this is not the way to go. The way to go is to continue to single out Israel as a rogue state, as a pariah state, as a state that is built on dispossession of the Palestinian people, as built on the desecration of the Muslim holy lands, and a desecration of all fundamental human rights that we all struggle for restoring in the land of Palestine. So again, normalization is a treason to our values, our religion, our Islam, and our basic and fundamental rights in ending the occupation and in decolonizing Palestine. Also, normalization is very profitable to Israel, because as we have seen and read a lot, is that economically speaking, Israel has benefited a lot from its sort of relationship with Emirates, at sort of engaging in sort of a trade agreements and sporting and sort of exchange of tourism and things like that. So it is a good sort of investment for Israel, but it's a bad investment for the Arabs, because they can't get any benefit really from engaging with Israel, and they cannot really get any sort of economic revenues, but they are getting only shame and scandal. And clearly what we've seen over the past couple of weeks is that the whole Arab world, the Muslims around the world, are in total support of the Palestinian struggle for freedom. And definitely these who are normalizing with Israel have been really hiding in the shade, as they say, because they are shamed. They've been shamed for their cooperation and their normalization with the Israeli occupation state. So basically, and to end my brief talk here, is that we Muslims around the world, we have to stand very firm and assertively on guarding the rights of the Palestinian people to freedom, and trying to delegitimize Israel and try to single it out as a settler colonial state. And it is rightly so. This is the kind of support that we really want from our brothers and sisters in India and Muslims around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Moshe Ramir. Thanks for explaining us the impact of normalization in such a short time, and from the Indian perspective, from the Indian people, we can guarantee that Indians have never compromised with the Israeli aggression, and will keep continuing to boycott the Israel, and will keep continue to boycott and condemn Israeli aggression. Thank you. So next, next I would like to invite our next guest, and he'll be speaking on another important topic, that is the change of public opinion in the favor of Palestinian cause. And for that, we have our guest directly from Gaza. He is Dr. Rafat Al-Arir. He's an academician, and he's the editor of the Gaza Right Facts and also author. So I would like to invite him to come forward and present his thoughts.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for organizing this amazing talk. Very important speech. It's very important to keep the dialogue moving on when Palestinians stop dying, stop being killed by Israel, and stop being massacred. Because sadly, what usually happens is that many people pay attention to Palestinians when they're being massacred, and when the killing stop, the quick killing stops, many people turn the other way. So thank you very much. And I'm really honored to be here with Professor Sami Al-Aryan and Dr. Moshe Al-Masri. It's very important to notice that so many things have changed in the past 5 years, I would say, probably around the time of Trump, around the time of 2014, when so many people saw how brutal a ruler like Trump, supported by many racist dictators like Netanyahu and other people around the world. For us as Palestinians, we have been hurt. We have been hurt the most by Trump. We're not selfish to say this, but he did so many things. He supported the massacring of Palestinian freedom marchers in Gaza, in the Great Return March. He gave Jerusalem as a capital to Israel on a golden platter. And when the killing started, when Israel started killing Palestinians, Trump was like, Israel has the right to defend itself. So this kind of marriage between dictators, between brutal mindless, heartless rulers made people like pay attention to what's going on in Palestine. It's like, oh my God, if Trump is supporting Israel, it must be it's because Israel is bad, not because Israel is wrong. I want to build on what Professor Sami just said. This is not something that started a month ago or 2 weeks ago. And people who start from 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago with the invasion and the horrible barbaric invasion of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the bombardment of Gaza, those who want to start here want to start the story from second. They don't want to mention Israel, the occupation, the siege, the apartheid regime, the racism. They want just to make people blame the victims for reacting to the brutality they are facing. So with the invasions of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Ramadan, in the holiest month, the holiest day, the holiest place in Palestine, more and more people, and we've seen this on social media, I've seen many non-Muslims or non-religious people saying, oh my God, how can Israel do this? Why is Israel doing this? Does Israel think the world is blind, attacking Muslims in Palestine in their holiest place, in their holiest month? And these questions are important because people start seeing Israel for what it is, a racist apartheid regime. And there's something I like always to highlight. Just 2 weeks before Israel invaded Al-Aqsa Mosque, Israel attacked and brutalized Palestinian Christians in Jerusalem, prevented them from celebrating Easter, attacked them. We've seen this videos and pictures. So this is a war against Palestinians, whether Muslims, Christians, or whatever. In Gaza, what happened is also important. Israel deliberately and systematically attacked homes, attacked buildings, residential buildings, and whole blocks, attacked high-rise buildings. We've seen this, the whole world saw this. And Israel, for example, when Israel attacked the media tower, the most important media tower with Al Jazeera and Associated Press. And this, by the way, this place houses dozens of Palestinian small businesses and and startups. So when Israel destroys this building, it destroys thousands of jobs, hundreds of jobs. Thousands of kids are going to be without with less food or no food because of what Israel did. When Israel did this, it was flexing its muscles because it showed the world that we can commit any crime because America and Europe support us. Nobody is going to punish us, and there will be no consequences. But Israel did something interesting. They called the owner 10 minutes before or 15 minutes before and told him, hey, evacuate. And you can't evacuate. What are you going to evacuate? Because all the equipment, all the computers and the machines and everything are going to be left behind and destroyed. On the same day at night, Israel massacred 42 family members. So during the day, Israel called the owner of the tower and told him, evacuate, we're going to destroy this building. And at night, when nobody is seeing, no cameras are there, Israel, without any warning, without calling anybody, destroyed a whole residential block, massacring 42 Palestinians and injuring around 100. And when we speak, the total number is now 354 Palestinians, and almost 2,000 Palestinians were killed. And those 2,000 Palestinians were supposed to be killed. Only a miracle from God saved them. So it shows how Israel wanted to kill as many people as possible. When Israel did this, when they targeted the Al-Aqsa family, Abu al-Auf family, and one of them is a student of mine and Dr. Moshir's, Zainab al-Aqsa lost 17 family members. There is this little kid, so heartbreaking. Israel killed him, killed his father, killed his grandfather, and killed his great-grandfather. 4 generations. This is extermination. This is genocide. This is not we toning it up. This is what's going on: ethnic cleansing and genocide against native Palestinians. And with the deliberate destruction of the infrastructure, the roads, the electricity, the water, the sewage lines, the internet access points, the medical centers, the Gaza's only COVID-19 testing center was destroyed, was damaged, was out of order because of Israeli attacks. Now, all of this was being broadcast to the whole world. partly on social media, but partly on mainstream media, but most importantly, on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram. And because Palestinians have accumulated this amazing experience of exposing Israeli crimes, and Palestinians have been working with a global movement of struggles around the world. We have millions of people around the world on social media supporting us and tweeting and retweeting and posting. And this is how the change of the public opinion in favor of Palestine started to be. It started slowly, probably around 2014, when Israel killed 2,500 Palestinians, including 551 kids. And the whole world started to see this. And we saw the real change. For the first time ever, celebrities, footballers, models, actors, politicians started condemning Israel for what it is, it's doing, the massacres, the crimes, the attacks against civilians, because the people were seeing everything not on mainstream media, but mainly on social media. Many of them started opening their eyes, starting asking the right questions, started condemning Israel for its apartheid regime. Now, I'll talk about 3 points here in the change, where we can see that change. So in addition to the social media and the millions of people around the world supporting Palestine and Palestinians, the New York Times published 4 very important pieces. And when we talk about the New York Times, this is a Zionist institution, an institution that has dehumanized Palestinians, that almost literally copy-pasted Israeli army press releases as if they are news. Always eliminated Palestinians. But this change, this pressure, probably because of this pressure, but there could be there is a disagreement between Palestinians and pro-Palestinians. Why is the New York Times doing this? But 4 pieces. I posted a piece. Can Israel, my daughter asks, can Israel destroy the building in the dark? About how I'm trying to calm my kids down, how I'm trying as a father to explain what's going on to my children. And a Palestinian lawyer, Diana Batu, published a very powerful piece on the myth of coexistence, where she said, no, there's no coexistence in Israel, because Israel doesn't want non-Jewish people to be there. And the wonderful piece by Layla Al-Aryan, Professor Sami's daughter, my grandfather bought a home in Gaza with his savings, and Israeli strike destroyed it. Also powerful. So many people were amazed. Why is the New York Times doing this? And finally, 3 days ago, they published the pictures of all the children killed in the latest Israeli war. They published the Palestinian kids and also the 2 Israeli kids killed. 66 Palestinian kids were killed. And there was an uproar. Many Palestinians and pro-Palestinians are still doubtful that the New York Times is doing this because it is riding the wave, because now Palestine is a trend and it brings more clicks and hits and readers and subscriptions. And some believe that this could be, it is 37 years late, but it is something good. It's good that at least Americans are being exposed to what's going on in real life. But the Zionists and the pro-Zionists were furious. So many of them, again, they were everything the Zionists did. It exposed how evil they are, how horrible, inhumane they are. And many of them said, okay, we are going to end our subscription to the New York Times, only because the New York Times started humanizing Palestinian kids. If you post the pictures of killed kids who were killed, and you don't like this, it means you are a horrible person. And every move the Zionist propaganda took, it was even worse. They were like in a hole and digging themselves even deeper. In addition to this, so many Palestinians were on mainstream media, on the BBC, CNN, DW. Not sure Professor Sami was on TV. Dr. Mushir Amr was so many times. I was so many times. Ali Abu Ni'ma, and so many young Palestinians for the first time were speaking for Palestinians. for decades, it was always Israelis speaking on our behalf, or non-Palestinians saying what we feel, what we should have, what we should do. But now it's Palestinians who are speaking to the world. It's true that news anchors are usually like Israeli officers to us, because they adopt Israeli propaganda, Israeli lies and fabrications, and they usually interrogate us. But despite that, we managed, Palestinians and pro-Palestinians managed to speak truth to power, to say that this is not about today or the rockets. For example, I was asked a question on the BBC, why don't you stop the rockets? I said, it's not about the rockets. The rockets are like 10 years old. And Hamas is like 30 years old, but the occupation is 73 years old. And there are no rockets. There is no armed resistance in the West Bank. And Israel killed, many people will not believe this, perhaps. Israel killed almost 30 Palestinians in the West Bank. In the same time, it killed 250 Palestinians in Gaza. And there are no rockets. There is no armed resistance in the West Bank. So this is, Israel is like, I say this many times, Israel is not only against Palestinian resistance. Israel is against our very existence. Israel doesn't want us to be here. In addition to this, like footballers, like I just mentioned, Riyad Mahrez, Mohammed Salah, Bella Hadid, and Gigi Hadid, and Dua Lipa, and Mark Ruffalo, and John Oliver, and politicians, amazing pro-Palestinian politicians. I'll mention some of them in a bit, were tweeting about Palestine, retweeting issues and articles about Palestine. And this takes the message, the Palestinian cause, to millions and millions of people. And I'm following this trend, like people who have never tweeted anything about Palestine, people who have never been exposed to Palestine. When they saw what's going on, they immediately started supporting Palestine. And this is amazing. We need to build on this. So why is this the change? So there is a lot of change. Why is this change happening? Number one, we've seen, I'm not sure how many, but around the world, I would think that millions of people were out in the streets, took to the streets in support of Palestinian human rights. And if it weren't for COVID-19, I think we would see even more and more people out in the streets. Yesterday, I'm not sure how many hundreds of thousands were in America protesting and calling for Palestinian freedom and independence and into the Israeli occupation. So the change is happening for many reasons. Number one, Palestine is a just cause. It's not only a humanitarian cause. It's wrong to say Palestine is a humanitarian cause. It's a political cause. First and foremost, this is about politics. Israel is an occupying power, brutal occupying racist power, and this occupation has to end. And in this way, Palestine and the Palestinian cause is part of the global cause around the world, the global struggle against racism and discrimination. And it's so beautiful to see, like I am on Twitter all the time, and I see so many people from Kashmir, from places that are Black people in America and in Africa, and are supporting Palestine. Many people in India, in Pakistan, in America, in Australia, in Brazil, from Europe, supporting Palestine, in Iraq, in Syria, in Jordan. So it's usually those people who have been hurt, who have been brutalized, who have suffered because of discrimination. We always come together. We support each other. Another reason for this great change is the pro-Palestine groups. Like what you're doing now is amazing. I'm not sure how many people are going to watch this, but even a few people is great. This, we like one or two people, if we reach out to 1, 2, 100 every day, every week, 1,000 every month, that would be enough, because in time we'll have millions and millions of people mobilizing for Palestine. So such talks, dialogues with Palestinians, whether again in India, in Europe, in America, in Africa, in Australia, everywhere, they help raise awareness, and this is what we want as Palestinians. Because we always say this, Palestine is not a cause for Muslims only. You don't have to be a Muslim or an Arab to support Palestine. You need to be human. And probably one more reason is that for the change is Israel has been exposed more than ever before because of the cameras and mobile phones, again, the social media, as a racist entity. And many people have seen what Israel is doing around the world. Everywhere there is a coup, a military coup, everywhere there is a dictatorship, Israel is supporting them with money, supporting them with weapons. Israel has supported almost every genocide since its establishment in South Africa, in Europe, in Asia, everywhere. And finally, there is an important reason. We've seen how America is the root cause of the problem because of how it supports Israel with money and politics and weapons. But the young American politicians, especially in the Congress, with the new caucus, Black caucus, and the people of color, those people did an amazing job for Palestine. We expect more from them, but what they did is a good start. Hopefully, this is going to escalate for them, calling for BDS boycotting and sanctioning Israel and divesting from Israeli businesses. I'll name 𝐏𝐚𝐿 AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, and Cory Bush, and other amazing politicians. So when those people with their great platforms talk about Palestine, how Palestinians are suffering, and how Israel is a brutal, racist entity, more and more people get the message and become part of this struggle. And now, how is Israel reacting to this? Israel has gone insane, and at the same time, it's very tragic what's going on, what Israel is doing, how its social media accounts are, in a way, celebrating the deaths of the massacres against Palestinians. But sometimes I pity them because they have become like a teenager, demonizing Palestinians at the same time and justifying the massacres. And then, oh, we are poor, please support us, stand with us. We are being hurt by Palestinians. So Israel escalated its systematic methods of demonizing and dehumanizing Palestinians, lying and fabricating. There are so many videos, so many pictures, so many cartoons Israel did that are lies. Yesterday there was a post about Israeli war minister using a picture of a hospital from Pakistan, trying to lie and fabricate and tell his audiences that, look, Palestinians are using this hospital for military purposes. This is what Israel is. It was built on genocide, on fabrications and lies, and continues to live on genocide and fabrications. And many people started to see this. The other thing Israel and the Zionist lobby did was use the anti-Semitism card. Anti-Semitism is categorically condemned by Palestinians. Anti-Semites have no place in the Palestinian struggle, Palestinian movement. But most of the anti-Semitic incidents that happened were fabricated or either taken out of context, where two guys are fighting, and then they say, look, they are targeting the Jews here in Europe or in America. And again, the people started seeing how Israel is doing this. Now, finally, what's going on now? There is a ceasefire in Gaza, right? But Israel continues the occupation, continues the siege, continues suffocating Palestinians, preventing import and export, invading Al-Aqsa, killing Palestinians. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I think, they shot and did a Palestinian teacher in the West Bank. And that's why in Palestine, we say, during a ceasefire, Palestinians cease and Israel fires, because Israel continues to kill. And when it comes to the rebuilding, because of the destruction of thousands, tens of thousands of homes and housing units and businesses were damaged, and schools and clinics were damaged or destroyed. Research has shown that Israel has always benefited from destroying Gaza. And this is important. 80% of the aid that came to Gaza for rebuilding went back to Israeli economy, because Israel says, you have to buy the cement, the building materials, everything from us, and we have no choice. And the people has to know this and expose Israel for what it's doing. So Israel is destroying Palestine, destroying Gaza, and Israel is being paid for destroying Gaza. It's like, thank you, here are $3 billion for what you did to Gaza. So Israel is importing the occupation, and the Palestinians get poorer, and the Israelis get richer. Now, finally and briefly, what do we need to do? Again, the occupation hasn't ended. We need to continue the struggle, continue the awareness. We need to continue spreading the word, reaching out to people we know and people we don't know. Palestine is not a Muslim or an Arab cause. And honestly, we did, and I'm sure Dr. Mushir and Professor Sami agree with me, we did more talks with non-Muslims and non-Arabs than we did with Arabs. And this is In a way, it's very, very good, great, but in a way, it's sad because we need more Arab brothers and sisters around us. People, briefly, one, please go to social media, follow Palestinian accounts, listen to them, see what they have to say about the struggle, about their fight against racism. Because usually mainstream media hides 99.99% of the truth. Listen to them, follow them wherever they are, engage with them, ask them. And something Dr. Mushir mentioned, it's BDS, boycotting Israel. Boycotting Israeli companies, Israeli services, Israeli applications, Israeli goods, and also boycotting the companies that benefit from Israel. There are many companies that help the Israeli occupation. If you know about some of these, boycott them. Probably you can go to bdsmovement.net or the electronic Intifada for more resources about this. So you can ask Palestinians and they will give you lists of companies that benefit from the occupation and help the Israeli occupation. We need people to support us online. It's important by tweeting, by posting, by sharing, and also in real life. And part of this, finally, real life change is the pressure we need to put on politics, on politicians. We need to call them, to talk to them, to ask them what they think about Palestine and what they can do to help Palestinians. And honestly, I'm not saying this only about Palestine, because Desmond Tutu says, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. If we prevent injustice in Palestine, we can stand and prevent injustice everywhere, in India, in Kashmir, in the Arab world, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, and everywhere. So this is what I have for this one. This great change in real life, in the support and on social media, the popular level and the official level, and hopefully we can invest and build on this in order to affect real change and in the Israeli occupation in Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rafat. Thanks for a very informative lecture. And I would like to thank you on behalf of our organization for a very motivating and informative talk. Next, we'll be having a speaker speaking on the topic media and Palestinian cause, the road ahead. For that, I would like to invite 𝐏𝐚𝐿 She is a Palestinian refugee and an activist, and she lives in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and she is also the head of PR and media in Friends of Palestine. So I would like to invite Sister 𝐏𝐿 to come and present on the topic media and Palestinian cause, road ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anis, and good evening and good night, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy and pleased to take a part in this forum. Thanks for having me, and I'm more than happy actually to represent Friends of Palestine and as well as the Palestinian International Forum for Media and Communication. It's actually such an excellent topic that we're going to discuss today, and I'm happy to cover on the field that I've been interested in and working in for quite time, which is the media and the road ahead for Palestinian as a Palestinian youth myself. But actually, before moving into this discussion, let's remember that one thing that I want to frame in this speech and the word I'm giving, that remind everyone that the mainstream media and largely the West support Israel perspective and point of view and foreign policies as well, which is not a huge surprise for all of us. So we need to discuss further, remembering that we are having a big challenge now in supporting and raising the voice as Palestinians and the Palestinian narrative as well in all means and in different levels we're having for now. Actually, we wouldn't be having here together discussing in this forum unless of the social media and the spark that has started in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood from the activists and the residents in the Sheikh Jarrah, Muna al-Kurd and Muhammad al-Kurd. So the Palestinian uprising and the attacks that has been happening in Al-Aqsa and Gaza actually has made a significant difference this time, allowing every one of us to speak up for Palestine and to keep reminding us that this is an important cause for every human being. So since the last month, the uprising has been happening, and such violence actually has been happening for decades in Palestine, but there is no proper coverage every time that it's happening over there. What we have noticed now is a shift in the reporting for certain media outlets, especially the Western, even if they're not likely to significantly affect or shape any different policies for the time being. But we would like to mention that The Guardian, actually, they list support for Balfour Declaration as one of their worst errors of judgment over the past 200 years, which is something that hasn't happened previously. Also mentioning that the New York Times, they runs a front page coverage of Gaza's youngest victims under the title that they were just children. However, we shouldn't forget that it's important to understand that initially the starting point for them was profoundly pro-Israeli viewpoint, but still talking about Palestine equally. Credence to Israel voices was certainly an idea that is largely unacceptable in the mainstream report, but now they appear more frequently in the mainstream media outlets, such as well recognizing that there's a huge disparity in the death toll for Palestinians and Israeli civilians, let's say. So such shifts in media outlets, social media, and think tank content as well reinforce each other. For example, when lawmakers raise concerns about Palestinians' human rights, that action is newsworthy, which leads to media outlets highlighting this issue. But we should not forget that with this media coverage that is happening, on the other hand, we're having another, let's say, silencing for the Palestinians, the people who are advocating for Palestine. Like a week after the Israel bombs completely destroys the EB's Gaza Bureau and the building, which has different media streams offices, the AB management, Associated Press in America, they fired a young journalist because she was a part of a Palestinian solidarity group back in her college. So people are consistently fired or blacklisted over the advocacy for Palestinian rights. Here, ladies and gentlemen, we can see and we can emphasize on the role that media can play in protecting and promoting for human rights in the world. And for sure, it plays a significant role in Palestinian cause because media makes people of their rights and people aware of their rights and other rights as well, expose its violation and focus attention on people and areas in need of covering and protection in order for them to pursue their case until they achieve their rights as well. So from here, I would like to move on to the India role in gaining support for the Palestinian cause by strengthening Palestinian voices and sharing Palestinian narrative as well to create a theme of interest. Not forgetting that 22 languages are officially spoken in India, including the English language as well. So that means that the Indian coverage may have a great reach and engagement recognized globally, supporting Palestinian by covering the news from Palestinian perspective with accuracy, of course. So the focus should be actually starting from the mainstream media outlets, following by the social media platforms as well. So as we all knew that the Palestinian narrative has been silenced for decades and we're facing a digital apartheid as well, but hopefully not anymore. And we're now only at the first step of moving on into this digital revolution. And we've witnessed that most activists, human activists and youth activists, even political activists are taking part in this revolution. Coming back to social media, that has played a major role one more time, that allows Palestinians and human rights organizations to circumvent traditional medias and government censors and provide images, videos, and voices of what Palestinians were truly having on the ground into the world that once lacked access to places like Gaza, or actually some of them, they choose to ignore or disbelieve Palestinians themselves. So coming now for the real support or the role that everyone can do for Palestine, the role that everyone can do and the real support for Palestine digitally needs accuracy in the terms that being used and the context which is framed to tell the Palestinian stories through, which actually will serve the cause at the end of the day. Plus being creative in delivering such messages, especially when using social media platforms in the media revolution we're having nowadays, plus reaching out to people on ground and to activists, as the fellow speakers have mentioned as well, because that give us more accuracy actually. Not forgetting the media organization that actually can help and guide to achieve such objectives. now everyone is able to make a change. We are able to make a change if we have the belief and we have the courage to support Palestinian cause. And I believe we have it all. Now we are all able to create content. We're able to create a change, and we have all the tools for that. So being vocal and speaking out for things that matter, I think that's the most important things. And talking about Palestinian cause, it's a cause for any human being who supports freedom and is against the apartheid system that we're having in my homeland. So what we want to mention here is that Palestine has been under occupation for 73 years, and the media coverage has been fluctuating through this years, actually. So for now, since we're having this opportunity and since we witness that there's a global awareness and change in the covering of the Palestinian narrative, we should take this opportunity as a Palestinian activist and a pro-Palestinian supporters actually to continue and to make a dramatic change further in order to sustain this activism, especially on the media platforms. Because the more we repeat a specific messages using main titles and headlines, the main influence we will be having on the audience as well. So emphasizing one more time that the accuracy and creativity is what matters the most, plus sustainability. Once we are sustainable in supporting Palestine, this cause will be always being handled in the mainstream media. So each and every media outlets actually that we can reach the world through to support Palestine is very important. And as I've mentioned, that we should not forget that Palestinian voices are being silenced, and it's still ongoing. I mean, Palestinians back in Palestine, they're being arrested only for sharing live streams or videos telling the world what's happening to them. So this apartheid system is still ongoing for now. So we need to for the support to be sustained as well. That's all for now that I have, and it's almost brief, but I would love to say that it's a bit comprehensive, and we've tried to deliver the main ideas that we wanted to focus on. And I will end my word by quoting Mahatma Gandhi, saying that truth never damage a case that is just. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister Lynn, for giving a very nice lecture to us and helping us know how we can contribute towards the Palestinian cause in media. So I just like to say a few things here. Recently, the Indian people had run a Twitter campaign that is Stand with Palestine, and I don't remember any Twitter campaign in India standing for 2 continuous days, and this was the only campaign that was running for trending #1 in India for 2 days, even though there was a very big attempt by the Hindutva forces, by the fascists, to trend in favor of Israel. So that is what the Indian people are doing, and will continue to do that. So once again, I thank you. Now I would like to invite Professor 𝐏𝐸𝐾𝐬𝐭𝐢𝐜𝐞, who is the General Secretary of NCHRO and also an EC member of Popular Front of India. So I would invite him to speak on the topic of the lessons for people's movement from the Palestinian cause. So I invite Professor 𝐏𝐸𝐾𝐬𝐿 to come forward and put before us his thoughts.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about certain topics related to Palestine and the liberation of Palestine. In fact, it has been a great learning experience as far as we are concerned, because we are listening to the people who are closer to what is really happening in Palestine. I would like to stress on one important point, that is the recent 11-day war. I don't know whether we can use it as a war. Recent 11-day attack on Gaza has proved to be the demolition of the myth that Israel is invincible. That is a very important point, because in 1948, when Israel came to existence, using the tremendous support that they got from Britain and France and other countries also, the myth was being spread by Israel that Israel was standing alone against the Arab countries around. The Arab armies were not able to drive away Israel to the seas. Such was a myth was created. In fact, we know that in 1948, when the first Israeli aggression in Palestine took place, there was not a single Arab country which was free enough. Most of the Arab countries were colonial, were controlled by colonial powers, especially Great Britain and France. For example, Egypt, even though it was nominally ruled by a king, it was controlled by Lord Kitchener, who was a viceroy in Cairo. And France, of course, was taking control of the whole area of Syria and Lebanon. And no other country. Iraq was once again under British control. And the British actually were controlling the military, the army, and all other paramilitary forces in these countries. And they were not able to offer effective military resistance to the Israeli aggression. But the myth was spread by Israel and the Western media, especially the media in the United States and in Europe, who were in favor of a Zionist entity in Israel, which, as some of our brothers from Gaza have rightly remarked, as a colonial settler state. In fact, it was a French historian and author, Maxime Rodinson, who wrote a book about that, calling Israel a colonial settler state, which exactly is, because both the colonial powers, that is mostly France and Great Britain, wanted to keep the control of the Middle East because they were afraid that the Middle East nations, when they become really free, when they were able to decide the political fate, will be a great threat to the colonial control over these countries. Because of the great natural reasons and so many other things, I don't want to detail about these things. This was the reason why Israel was established as a colonial settler state, something like a police state or a police outpost, to keep an eye on the real democratic forces in the Middle East. And they have been really successful in keeping the Middle East in slavery, in autocracy, and at the same time using that opportunity to exploit the natural resources. For example, in the case of in 1948, when Israel was established, the Suez Canal was controlled by France and Britain. Less than 10% of the income from Suez Canal went to Egypt, even though it was nominally ruled by a king, King Farouk. The other 90% of the income from Suez Canal went to France and Great Britain, who were controlling the Suez Canal Company. And that was the reason Israel was asked to attack Egypt and other neighboring Arab countries in 1956 because Egypt nationalized Suez Canal, and Egypt was showing some signs of dignity, some signs of freedom under Jamal Abdel Nasser. And in 1956, again, Israel attacked the Arab countries. And at that time, France and Britain were behind Israel. But because of certain other reasons, because of the strategic calculations of the United States, which was biding for a time to intervene in that area, because of the pressure coming from the US President Dwight Eisenhower, Israel was forced to withdraw from this. But Israel, as our brothers said, that it is a military settler state. It is always something like a military outpost, always worried about our existence, always worried about the defeat in a final battle with the Palestinians, because Palestinians are the people who really own the area. About 9 million Israelis now living in the occupied territory. I can say that Israel itself, the whole Israel is occupied Palestine. The 9 million people, out of that, more than 60% of the 9 million people come from different parts of the world. People who are driven by the belief that they are the real people who are destined by Jehovah to occupy the Holy Land. And they have every reason to ethnic cleanse the people. For example, I would also invite your attention to two important terms which has become very popular in the international media. One is ethnic cleansing, the other is terrorism. And whenever we talk about ethnic cleansing, Israel is the first country which used this technique of driving away people, hundreds and thousands of people from their homeland. For example, in Tel Aviv, in Ashkelon, in Lod, and such places are actually inhabited by people who are born there. Not only the Muslims, but also Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs. People who have been living, as one of our delegates in the speech have rightly pointed, who have been living for centuries. And there was only a few years of occupation by other countries, starting from Crusaders in the 11th century. They have been living there, driving away these people. And that is why one important Israeli historian who was forced to leave Israel because of his very, very provocative title of his book is his ethnic cleansing in Palestine. Nobody was willing to use that term in the case of Palestine, but Israel was actually doing it, driving away the people. And in 1967, once again, in 1948, there was an attack on Palestinians. In 1956, prompted by Great Britain and France, there was an attack on Palestinians. And 1967, Israel wanted to take control of the whole of the area, the whole Palestine. For in 1947, UN resolution about 23 and 24% of the Israeli Palestinian land was allotted to the Palestinians. The rest, people coming from other side, that is the Jews coming from other side. And Israel wanted to occupy that area also. So for these three wars, Israel was victor, turned the victor. And what a wonderful myth spread by them. One single country, which is about 9 million at that time, in 1967, it may not be even that, about 9 million people fighting 100 million Arabs alone without any support. And that was a myth spread by them, by the bestsellers written by pro-Zionist novelists in Europe and in the United States, by the films produced by Hollywood, which is under the control of Jews or Zionist directors and filmmakers. That was a story, and that was a myth, and that myth came to an end unknowingly, sometimes unknown to the other parts of the world. In 1982, when Israel, because of the hubris, because of the belief that they can always win militarily, invaded Lebanon in 1982, invaded Lebanon, driving away PLO, the PLO cadres and such other people, thinking that that would be bringing an end to any kind of resistance coming from the Palestinians. But they could not. They were forced to run away from Lebanon by Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not a real army, something like a group of guerrillas, driving away the Israelis, teaching them a lesson that they will not be able to control Palestine. They will not be able to totally take over Palestine, because people are there who are ready to fight, who are ready to sacrifice their lives. And this is exactly the lesson that now we get after the 11-day battle against the Hamas. All the rules of the game have been changed. All the rules of the game have been changed. For example, I can tell you, Benjamin Netanyahu is considered to be terrorist number one, because his history, his antecedents, everything prove that he will not be able to, he will not hesitate to kill civilians. Netanyahu is considered to be an extreme rightist Zionist who believe that they have got a historical right to occupy any place in Palestine. And this time, in 2021, Netanyahu hesitated to invade Gaza. Do you think that it is because of the military superiority of Gaza? No. Gaza is only 365 square kilometers, 2 million people, and it's a beleaguered area. It is blockaded by not only Israel, but also another client state of United States, Egypt, is blockaded by, and they will find it very difficult to survive. And Israel thought that just by bombing the housing complexes, just by bombing the skyscrapers, just by killing children, just by bombing schools, they will be able to terrorize Gaza. But Gaza, as I understand, Gaza has learned its lessons. For example, learned its lesson and developed its own defense strategy. You can understand how the comfortable people living in comfortable luxury in Tel Aviv and in Lod and Ashkelon and such other cities, the Jews who had been living a very comfortable life in the United States and such other countries, who had come to Israel and living there in comfort, thinking that they are living with complete safety and security, they had to go and they have to go and hide themselves in the bunkers created by, built by Israel because of the showering of rockets. It is not the rockets that we get from United States and from Russia or some other places. And Israel was talking about the Iron Dome. Nobody could penetrate the Iron Dome. Nobody, no missiles, no rockets, no drone attacks would be able to penetrate the Iron Dome. Hamas proved that they can easily destroy the Iron Dome and drive people away to the underground cellars. And this may be the lesson that we get from the resistance by Hamas, that we get from the resistance from Hezbollah in 1982, that a people, when they are determined to fight for their lives, fight for their dignity, fight for their security, fight for everything that a human being respecting his life, will be able to fight even the world's 7th largest military power, according to some studies. And now, I should also underline another point. Israel amassed the tanks, the armed vehicles, everything to make an attack on Gaza. But they hesitated. Do you know the reason why they hesitated? Do you think that Israel is such a weak military state? No. Because they are afraid of the massive deaths that they will be facing when they enter Gaza. And this is also something that Ariel Sharon, the master terrorist of our Netanyahu, he learned his lesson from Gaza when he invaded Gaza. And Israel, without any compulsion from other powers and other countries, de-escalated the invasion of Gaza, withdrew from Gaza, because Israel will not be able to sustain the occupation of a land for long, and they will have a humiliating withdrawal. So this is a lesson for all the resistance forces around the world. Something not unusual, because around the world the resistance forces fighting human rights violation, fighting occupation, fighting autocracy, fighting the curtailment of people's freedom. If these organizations, this resistance movement, the social organizations who are willing to fight for the freedom, they will be able to defeat delegation, the speech have rightly pointed.
So I would like to thank the backend team